Okay.
All right, we good? Well, good morning, everybody. Let's call to order the August 1st meeting of the North Gateway Redevelopment Advisory Board. Should we do a roll call? Please.
Jared Martin,
Here?
Deacon Lucas,
Here.
Mike Alley,
Here.
Scott Cantonwine, absent. Dana Castano. Here. Nate Levin, excused. And
Kevin Loss.
Kevin Moss, thank you, yes, and he's also absent. Thank you.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Approved. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the May 2nd?
Here.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion passes. We have no one here for public comment. So let's go right into this. Welcome. We have a new board member, Dana. Dana, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Dana Castano, so we'll start here. So I live in the area of the North Gateway. Next to it, adjacent, I guess I should say. In Highland neighborhood, we've lived there, my husband, son, and I have lived there for about 10 years. Well, I guess my son will be 5, so he hasn't lived there that long. But he's going into kindergarten, so it's a fun time right now. I also do a couple other volunteer activities in the area. So I'm also on the Marion County Fair Board. So a couple of weeks ago was the Marion County Fair. That's a lot of fun. I was also appointed earlier in the year to the Salem Library Advisory Board, and so that's been interesting given the recent time. But yeah, I've in working life, I work for the Department of Early Learning and Care for the state of Oregon, and my role is a tribal liaison, and so that's great. I love it because I'm also a tribal member. I'm from the Mountain Chippewa, and so it's a great connection to what's important to me individually, but also doing a good thing for increasing accessibility to early learning care services for tribal communities in the state. So that's what I do. In the past though, I did work for a developer who was getting into acquisition as a financial analyst. So probably know a little bit about this world. And I have a background in my degrees are economics and finance. And so I, in the past, also worked in like mortgage, working on like past due mortgages, managed a team doing that. So very, very much think the same thing. Right, and I'm glad to be here because, like I said, I live close to the neighborhood. Actually, I'll tell a little story about when I applied, what kind of prompted me to apply for this board, which happened like a year ago. But anyway, I know government takes time, but we decided we were going to go on a walk from our house from over on close to the deck school, down Pine up Portland Road to a Chinese restaurant. And that was actually, it's a short walk, but it was scary. It was scary because obviously we're walking with the family. My son was probably maybe 4 at the time. And going through that tunnel is kind of scary. Being right next to Portland Road when you get off. So we haven't walked that direction since. We always walk the other direction towards downtown. Because it's much more comfortable. So just seeing that there's a lot of opportunity to improve the walkability and livability in the area really prompted me to be here. So I'm glad I'm here now.
Good, yeah, thanks for joining us. We used to talk about that tunnel, didn't we? About what we were gonna do with that?
Well, so the board had a lot of interest in trying to do something, but the problem is we don't control it because it's tied to the railroad and railroad trumps everything. And so Public Works has tried adding lights, they've tried doing more cleaning, and every time, someone comes in and they break the lights or, there's something needed Because there's been a lot of conversation about how do you improve it, and the railroad just really hasn't.
They don't wanna work with us.
The solutions that I think have been presented in the past are just very cost preventative. In doing something like that, so there has continued to be sort of this, what else can we do to make it more user friendly, but at the same time. Have to work with what we have, which isn't always the best answer, don't get me wrong. Now, there's been some other ideas, like, okay, that's not the best way, and so, what can we do, and those boards talked about, what can we do on Portland Road itself to make that a little bit, better, and I will say, one of the things that came up, and the board was on it really before I came onto this board, is, improving what we call streetscape. Downtown, Sherry handles downtown, streetscape means a totally different thing than like Portland Road corridor, downtown, we're talking about putting in the, all the trees and, what are we doing to make it more, walkable and doing all the sidewalk cafes and the pedestrian lights and pedestrian lights.
Yeah.
So it's a little different, but when we're talking Portland Road, it's, can we move the utilities back? Can we open up the sidewalks? Can we do more crossings? Can we, maybe do some bulb out so that it doesn't feel so intense?
Yeah.
And we were able to do that sort of on the northern portion, but we didn't have any money to do the southern. Now, what we learned back maybe about a year ago, I wanna say, as part of the bond projects, that portion of the rest of Portland Road, which is really sort of from the tunnel, sort of where we kind of stopped, is a bond project to have some work done to improve, the sidewalks and the roads and things like that. So as a board, we've already had conversations that we wanna make sure we're putting money in as well.
Yeah.
One, to do the infrastructure. So since we're already tearing everything up, let's make sure the water, the sewer, all that is ready for development. Because if we have that and we have more development, then we're gonna have more activity. But that we'll be able to do the sidewalks. Do we need to have more pedestrian crossings? Do we need to, do they need to switch out the lights? Can they move utilities back? So we will be able to make some improvements. We also do have some funds set aside that would correlate with the public works, bike plan for the city. With the idea that if something was identified where there was an alternative route to kind of going through there, that we would have some funds that we could contribute towards that project as well. So that's sort of what we've kind of been able to put away and talk about is we can't do it just with what we have, but what can we do to like support the other projects to make it as nice as we can with the resources that we control. Is that really the best way to put it,
Yeah.
maybe? So that is something that we've like been talking about for a long time, is how else can we
Years.
improve that section right there for sure. And we're just gonna continue, where can we partner, where can we, keep pushing and keep trying for sure. So it's nice to have someone on the board who's constantly like, hey, what are we doing over there? To kind of help with our messaging on that one, so that's lovely.
Yeah, for sure.
Great.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Oh, yeah, my name is Jared. I'm an electrician. I also own a soil company and I own property over off of Mainline Drive, which is right at the corner of like Hyacinth and the Parkway, basically. I'm right next to the wrecking yard. And when we bought that property is when I found out about this board. And I wanted to be on a board, and so I applied and I got right on. It was pretty quick. And that was right at the beginning of the Portland Road Streetscape project.
Yeah, we were just starting.
Yep. And yeah. And now I'm the president. Or chair.
Chair.
I say
You
president.
were saying for 7 years you've been working?
For 7 years, I've been trying to get a permit. It's been very difficult, cause over there, the city hasn't. There wasn't enough need to expand like stormwater and stuff like that, and so every time I would just run into lots of stuff, and it started with a fire hydrant. And that took me 2.5 years to get the fire hydrant.
We had a lot of meetings.
A lot of meetings over the fire hydrant. And now I'm almost there, but now I'm Army Corps of Engineers because Clyde Creek runs through my property. So now I'm just with that, but as soon as they sign off, I think I'm finally gonna get to build. So I'm pretty excited. Fingers crossed.
It seems like I want my new space.
Yeah.
So we're kind of contingent on Jared's build, so my name's Steve Lucas, I'm from Salem, it's a South Salem High School. Did you? Yeah. Oh, class of 02, what class were you?
Love it.
Okay. I own a company called Stoneforce Products. We make packaging, so we do custom reusable packaging, swag. So like if you go to the grocery store and look at like the boxes, the bags, jars at the grocery store, that's the kind of stuff that we create. We source a lot of stuff in China, or we'll have the products created locally, like either in Portland or nationally. We're waiting on Jared to put up his building so we can move our company over into Salem, where we'll warehouse our products and distribute it out here locally. And the cool thing is Salem doesn't really have very many companies like that here locally. So we're already trying to set up this hub here, so we're trying to deliver here in Salem, which is kind of in the neck because we're like driving in and like delivering here to Salem. Waiting, kind of like setting this up, waiting for Jared to get his built.
I'm like,
No pressure.
like 4 months away, 4 months away, like 4 months away, and we're like, doing like, hey, well, our warehouse is gonna be right here, we promise this is gonna happen. But it's good though, it's good. So, yeah, so that's what we do, and I'm also on the advisory committee for CTech for plant life sustainability. And what we're doing with them is pretty cool, so that program is switching over to a bioplant science program, so basically they wanted to move from growing plants into a bioscience program, so they could get more nurses and doctor focused people into that program because they're kind of lacking. But what we're gonna do with them is we're gonna start working on bioplastics. So they'll be growing plants and then taking that plant waste, turning it into bioplastics and work on those biofilms for packaging food, which is kind of what and one of our main focuses for our packaging company is bioplastics, sustainable packaging. So it's kind of our big launch for next year. We'll be rolling out, we're already doing bioplastics, but next year we'll be rolling out like a program with CTech where we'll be doing biodegradable films with the kids, packaging, like, you know, some of the stuff that they're growing at the school and selling in their school, so.
Awesome, very cool.
Great, thank you. So Mike Alley, I'm Vice President of Turbine Ingredient. We're located on Hyacinth Street, about a block away from Portland Road. Our business has been located there for around 1970, so a long time Salem business. We were previously Kerr Concentrates was the prior to that. We're in the fruit and vegetable processing space. We employ about 100 employees year round. Done a lot of work with the city of Salem in different ways. And so I joined it really as a business representative and representing the businesses. But one of the things we're certainly been interested in, not just looking at this area for business, it is important that it's business friendly, but also a good livability area for our employees so that we can have good housing nearby our facility and other infrastructure. Besides that, we've talked about supermarkets, we've talked about other items too as well. So we own not only our facility, which faces on Hyacinth Street, we own an empty lot that's on facing Portland Road. So we're very involved and interested when we did the streetscape on the Portland Road on the northern end. And it looks great now, it really was nice. It's wider sidewalks, pedestrian crossings and so forth. But like Sarah was saying, right now we got this gap in the middle. We've done work on kind of both ends, but space to work on that. But yeah, so that's really the reason. I've been on the board for a number of years. So
Get off of it, even though you are technically, so Mike is one of the lovely people who actually turned out, but the way that our structure works is if you've turned out, but your space hasn't been filled, we always ask if you're willing to hang out until we fill it, and so Mike has graciously agreed. Nate, who isn't here today, also had agreed, and then he decided to reapply. So he will officially come back on for the full sort of, you know, thing. So we do kind of try to keep people, if we can, fill their spaces, just, yeah, it's nice to have the institutional knowledge and experience and whatnot, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
And this is Sarah.
Yeah, we met virtual.
We have met virtually, yes, we had a nice orientation, so yes, I'm here for whatever you need, it's your board. I just try to help guide where I can and bring things to you, and if you ever need anything, you can come to me or to Jared and
Yeah.
whatever you need, just let us know, we're a pretty busy group, so.
Yeah, we're pretty relaxed, but. It's fine. Okay, update. Zamora site,
We're calling it 2640 now.
okay, 2640.
People don't know what the Zamora sign is.
That's true, it has been 5-6 years
Yeah,
since it was.
so I've changed, like when we did the budget this year and everything, I removed all reference and now I'm just calling it the 2640 Portland Road site,
Yeah.
so it's not like, what's Zamora, and so we kind of just started calling it by its address. Do you want me to come down there, Linda?
Well, yeah, I need to get the document.
That's fine, I'll get it.
Bear with me here.
Oh, good. So, what you will recall, and we briefly touched on when we were doing orientation, is we have this 2640 Portland Road site that we purchased, and the initial intent of the purchase, so as the city, we can't just go out and purchase property because, hey, there might be an opportunity in the future, we have to have sort of a designated. So this particular stuff available.
Sorry.
That's good.
Yes, it's me. Just bear with me here for 1 second.
Yeah, listening to myself is not.
Okay. I put the document in the wrong place, I apologize.
No problem.
So I'm trying to locate it so I can share it. I've got it on the. It's right here.
So the idea was to purchase it and then look at extending Pine Street to sort of Silverton. And then be able to hopefully clean up kind of that triangle area. And we purchased, the purchase took quite a while. By the time we kind of closed on it, COVID had begun. Although we had looked at maybe what some interim uses could be for the site while we looked at, doing the actual infrastructure project. The needs sort of shifted into, sort of the homeless community that was becoming more and more prevalent. And so we ended up being able to use the site for temporary sheltering for about 18 months. As you might recall, this site has some DEQ restrictions on it because of its previous uses, which is what had limited only to the 18 months. After that, we've now continued to partner with our homeless service providers. So they use it for administrative functions. During all of that, we started having some initial conversations because one of the biggest challenges to doing the road extension is that there's a railroad crossing. So we have to engage with the railroad to find out if we were to move the crossing, what would you sort of require? And we have a railroad consultant that we work with to try and kind of expedite those conversations. And we got some initial feedback, and the feedback was what they were going to want was not feasible. Cost wise, impact to other crossings, it wasn't gonna be something that we would be able to move forward on. And so at that point, it became look down there.
Oh, that's okay, if you just wanna scroll, I don't think I'll need the keyboard, but.
I was just gonna move down.
Just scroll.
So at that point, the board, internally, we had conversations, the board, we had conversations of, well, we need to start figuring out what we wanna do with this site. Unlike our sites downtown, which Sheree was kind enough to join us, you haven't met, so this is Sheree Morgan, she is our assistant director, but she is our downtown urban renewal extraordinaire. She knows everything about downtown, and downtown actually has 2 sites now, that one has actually gone through this process and has a developer on board. The other is kind of just ahead of our process. So I asked if she could join us today, just in case we started getting into some of the details. I wanted to make sure we had somebody here that was much more of an expert than myself.
This is what we live for, this is exciting, to take something that
it's not meeting its highest and best use and put something there that will be catalytic and maybe something else will happen around it. So I'm very excited for you and for Sarah.
So I do have a question along that line. So you said you've done it for a couple others. Was this same company engaged? Or is this a
No,
different?
you're
Different,
lucky.
so we're doing a different process.
You're very lucky. You've had the opportunity to evaluate a site because it's in an area where
The attention
what
hasn't been on it.
what would be the best thing to put there versus in downtown, it's very different. We know what people want. You know, we've been looking at acquisition opportunities as a board, because I staff the board like Sarah does. Versus you have one that is just like a blank slate. We don't know. And of course, we were coming out of COVID, things have changed. That's why you're so fortunate to have a guiding document to inform the next steps and how you market this for redevelopment. I would have loved to have had that.
And that's what I was gonna say, makes us a little bit different is downtown, there's a different focus and people have a lot of ideas where with this site, we haven't been pushed, you know, you're just gonna put this there, you're gonna put that there. And we know it's a unique site. It's in a very unique location. Its access is definitely more unique. Its shape is more unique. It has environmental issues that makes it unique being just the word of the day apparently. And so the board was very supportive when I came to you guys and said, you know, I think what we need to do is to engage with Eco Northwest. They had done a market analysis for us, but it was pre-COVID. Things have changed, obviously. Let's have them updated, so we don't have to do a new one. But let's make sure we understand what's needed in the community. What do we have? What are we lacking? Who are we solving for? And at the same time, what we asked them to do, which is something we haven't done before in our department, is we had to do a development analysis. And it was kind of a two-pronged thing. So part of what they did was basically what we call a blind developer outreach. So we asked them to talk to the development community, not just in Salem, but they talked Pacific Northwest. They reached out to folks that are on the other side of the country to really get a good sense as to what's happening in development, how are things moving and shifting. And then for some of them, they did talk specifically about the site. We have no idea who they spoke with because we didn't want to influence any potential RFP process by knowing that somebody got more information than another or something like that. So between those two things, then what they went ahead and did is they did what they call sort of a residual land analysis. So they kind of took everything from the market analysis, everything they learned from the developers, they came up with some concepts that would make sense on the site. Then they applied all of our zoning, all of our requirements. How would that fit? What would that look like? How would you actually build it out? What would those costs be? What would you be able to bring in and rent to figure out, would it work? Would it not work? Or would it require subsidies? So what I have for you today, and full transparency, this is their overview, not mine, not our opinions, just their recommendations. And I have sort of information to share along the way that came from their broader report that was about like 50 pages. So what I tried to do is I just pulled the relevant high pieces just to make sure that, you know, you guys had it without saying, hey, here's a really long document. When, you know, reading it and correlating it, because I don't know it's really busy or anything like that. So this is just kind of what they found.
Cool.
We did not ask them to look at any particular type of development. We really left it open. However, I will say we did tell them that affordable housing needed to be included, even if it was a caveat, not gonna work in any way, shape, or form, but because one of the top priorities of the city right now is affordable housing. If we're gonna go through this process, in transparency, we need to make sure that we're including what the city's top priority is, at least as an evaluation. They did say they would have included it regardless, but just so that you guys know, that was sort of how we went about frameworking kind of everything that we have for them. So all of my sort of notes are their findings as well. There we go. So, like we said, we acquired this puppy back in 2017. Kind of talked about the DEQ sort of issues. We cannot have ground floor residential. So that's sort of the biggest piece. We did not go into specifics at the purchase as to what cleanup would be needed in order to do ground floor residential, because when we purchased it, the whole point was to extend Pine Street. So we don't have that level of detail, but it is something that, and I put it in your memo and I'll bring it up as we kind of go through, but that's sort of our next step that I'm kind of working on right now.
So looking at this photo, is there currently access from Silverton Road into that property?
I don't think so.
No, it's kind of, I mean, it used to be chained off right here, so I don't know if that chain is still there, but the main access points are off of Portland Road.
Right.
But you can access off of Silverton.
Okay.
Is that getting affected during that Silverton
Nope.
Road?
Nope,
They're not doing any new sidewalks or anything right now?
no, it'll pretty much, that project kind of will be capped off at up here, so this won't be impacted. Now, it's a good question to ask though, because we did sort of ask the design, so the Silverton Road, left turn, we're on the 17th and kind of the sidewalks and stuff did get delayed about a year. Only because the design that we had initially would have been in opposition of this extension. So we would have designed something, and then if this was gonna go through, we would have had to go back and redesign and spend more money, which didn't make any sense. So we kind of pushed the design a little bit until we knew what the railroad was gonna say about this situation. Now that we know that isn't moving forward, we've now moved ahead on the design of this, which honestly waiting worked out perfect because we didn't know that Silverton Road was also gonna become a bond project as well, that we've now been able to partner on to get more project for our dollars. And we're still spending more than what we budgeted, but we're saving money still in the long run. So it was one of those where it won't be impacted as part of that piece of it. So it's about 1.69 acres. Obviously you've got the railroad tracks right here, which make it a little bit more challenging. We have the building that's currently on site. It's about 4,800 square feet. That was constructed back in 1989. Following the demolition of the Winnell property fueling station, it then became the offices for the DMV, and then later the Zamora auto sales lot. So the environmental contaminations you had asked, Jared, so between 1920 and 1975, Shell Oil Bulk had a storage facility which operated around the site. So they weren't on the site, but it was around the site that was building in some contamination. And then the southern part of the site was used as a gas station from about into the 1960s. In 1987, the underground storage tanks from the Shell oil storage facility were removed, but there was construction in the early 2000s and the city discovered petroleum contaminated soil on this particular site. So right now, like I said, we can't do residential per our agreement with DEQ when we purchased it because of the exposure to the hazardous substances. The other thing that we found is we can't do anything that would impact the groundwater. We can't release that groundwater because it could provide further contamination. So that does limit how deep we can go down under the site for any type of construction. Because we don't want any sort of stormwater infiltration or anything like that. So where that sort of leaves us right now is I'm engaging with DEQ right now. And so we'll go through in this kind of their overview, but I'll be taking all of these different concepts to them to say, okay, if we wanted to do these, what does this mean for cleanup? What does this mean for cleanup? So we can get a good idea of, for what they tell us, is that going to make any of these projects kind of not feasible? Because of either if they say, no way you can't do it, or this is the cost, or this is as far down as you can go into the ground. And then when we talk to developers and they say, well, you can only go this many stories, that isn't gonna work. We can start to get a better framework as to what's actually physically feasible on the site. So I'm coordinating the meeting right now with DEQ, but we'll also have our city's our environmental engineering wizard. He knows everything about environmental and engineering, and he's amazing. And then the gentleman who did all the site testing when we purchased the site has also agreed to participate with us. So he'll be sitting in as well so that he can turn around and give us like scopes, quotes, estimates, so that we'll get a really good sense, and everyone will be hearing the same thing from DEQ at the same time. And so I'm hopeful to have that meeting very soon, and be able to bring you guys something in October. It's kind of my fingers crossed goal.
So would that be like the first floor would be like parking or
Right
would it be
now,
like?
Yeah, right now we don't have any
Commercial or-
residential on the ground floor, so it would be some form of commercial, it could be parking,
Right.
But you
but
can do flex space, right?
You
You can
can-
have like,
Yeah.
yes, but none of what you'll see in here is none of the prototypes include housing on the ground floor, which does change sort of the value of the project by not being able to do that. So that's sort of the biggest caveat that they had to work with, and I did not ask them to do a prototype with it on the ground floor, but if we were to figure out a way to do it, I can turn around and have them rerun it with that to see what that looks like. That's always an option, that we would have here. So that's sort of kind of where the site is. As just some general background, the zoning is mixed use 1, which is super flexible. And these are the things that they built into when they were doing everything to make sure we wouldn't need rezoning, we wouldn't be asking for variances in any of their analysis. Doesn't mean that we couldn't, but in their analysis, we're working within everything that the city currently has in place in terms of planning, zoning, building codes, everything like that. So it just kind of gives you an idea of everything that we have. So I mean, you can do most forms of residential, commercial, and industrial in this area. You know, it really just doesn't allow for sort of single family. It's kind of the biggest thing. So moving on, you know, this kind of comes from our market study, kind of our update. The Portland Road corridor is really growing at a faster rate than the city of Salem, and Marion County overall. We're looking at a younger and more diverse population in our corridor. They also found there's a high share of Hispanic or Latino residents, and we have quite a few Latino-owned businesses in proportion to the rest of the city. So just some background things that they kind of put out. In terms of gaps, they did find that there's sort of a lower median household income within the area and a higher share of adults over 25 without bachelor's degrees compared to the city and the county. So that's just some of the updated kind of info. The corridor is home to 18% of the city's industrial inventory, and has extremely low vacancies. Right now, this corridor actually draws higher rents for industrial and flex spaces than the city overall. So maybe Deacon should start looking somewhere else for a cheaper space.
I already have. I've been very like. Already have.
This is the highest, so you know, just saying, that's what
they're
we're
saying
saying.
it's $10 a square foot, is that right?
So this is over a 10-year period.
Yeah,
So it's sort of the rate per square foot on average over 10 years. And when you look at city of Salem as a whole, it's about $8.64. And when you look at just this corridor, it runs at about $10. So it's a little bit
It's
more.
cheaper than yours.
that is way more expensive than I was told.
Well, it's an average over 10 years.
Right.
So, you know, I'll say that, it's not just specific and they don't.
Properties and.
Exactly, has shifted and changed and dynamics have shifted, but we just wanted to get a good feel, and because some of this stuff they had done when they did the Portland Road Action Plan. We wanted, if you're gonna update it, just update it all, because there might be information in there that we don't need for this project, but would be useful for something else that we're looking at, or,
Real quick.
yeah.
So on the retail and stuff, I don't know that much about how they use it for lingo, but did a grocery store work there?
Yeah.
'Cause isn't there no grocery stores in that area?
Not really, I mean, the closest thing is probably Fred Meyer over on Broadway, they're really small, like Isabella's grocery, but. I
And then Ross is like way up.
Yeah.
Grocery stores do well though. Is that a profitable business?
Sure you
I
did.
think.
Jump in, I know you have some experience with the grocery store requests in downtown.
Yeah, that's like the number one thing everybody wants in downtown. Unfortunately, up until maybe now, we haven't met that profile that is very specific to somebody who does a grocery store. I mean, it's easier than anything else because they're looking at what's your population within a 3 mile, 5 mile, what side of the road are you on, or coming to work or going home from work. And I had a grocery study done for across the street. And what came out of that was Walmart, neighborhood Walmart. It took years when I worked with Mayor Taylor to get Trader Joe's into Salem, and of course, the new developer for across the street, they're hoping to do a grocery store, but again, it's gonna depend on what's your residential base. Parking still,
Yeah,
you know,
That's gonna be the
parking's a
tricky
big
piece.
one,
Yeah.
and even if you do like a 21,000 square foot, you know, smaller type of grocery store, like a Zupan's in the Portland area, Green Zebra, Basic Market, there's some of these kind of smaller, different kinds of grocery stores. But yes, if that was something that you really were interested in, that would be something I would ask Sarah to engage a study on. Because it's so specific and maybe this, or maybe you're not there. You're not there yet, but I don't know if that site, as you say, that building is 4,800 square feet.
Yeah, it's not super.
Yeah, the site's pretty
Yeah,
small,
it is,
which
that's-
is why we didn't go, it doesn't mean there couldn't be some type of
Yeah,
a
I
smaller
would-
neighborhood offshoot or something, if we did do residential, there would be space to maybe do
Yeah,
something.
I
You see that in
don't
Portland
think
where
it's,
like the smaller Zoom hands pop up.
it would
or
have to be a
It's
smaller.
like, those stores are so expensive in that neighborhood.
Well, you know what's funny
It's
about
like-
Zupan's, they're not all like that. You know, there's only just a few now, the one in Lake Oswego,
Wow.
unbelievable.
And then there's the one that's on right off
And
of
then there's
First Side,
Macadam,
Yeah,
Northwest
one,
20.
and then, when I worked in Portland, that they had a standard dairy, it did ice cream and stuff, and they redeveloped that and put the Zupan's on the ground floor. And we did low-income housing on upper floor,
Mhm.
and that one wasn't. That didn't price you out like the other one, so it is somewhat location specific, it doesn't have to be so like New Seasons and Market of Choice, which are really.
And it could be, you know, one of the ways that
Yeah.
downtown is sort of framed theirs is, you know, they didn't go out with an RFP that kind of said, you need to have these 3 things. These are our ultimate goals.
Yeah, we
Come to
just,
us with ideas.
we threw the net, we wanted to know what a developer would be able to do there that was financially feasible for them, including the housing, a mix of uses. But we didn't, and it was hard because I have a board and it's like, we want yoga, yeah, you know, you cannot tell somebody that they have to get a yoga person. So that was a fun part of the conversation because we want a grocery store, we can't tell somebody you have to put a grocery store there because they're the ones who have to make it financially feasible. They have to get the money. They have to get a return for their investors. So we all want these things, but we floated it very, very broad. We just said this is our vision, that it's respectful of the historic district, that it understands the view, that it understands, you know, kind of who and what we are. And we would love it to be a mix of uses. We would, you know, I mean, not one a grocery store.
And this will get us to the point where, one, the goal is we'll know more than the developers that are coming in, which is really nice. We know what's feasible, what's not feasible. So when we start to cast that net out, we can be specific in terms of these are the things we want, because you're not asking for something that we know isn't feasible. So when a developer comes in, it's like, okay, these are people that they understand, they know what's happening, and hopefully it'll bring us a better sort of quality of folks, but also people won't be disappointed with maybe what comes in, because there's the reality of what we're sort of working a little bit, so.
I have another question, just on the different uses. So one thing I noticed is daycare, but is that one of the things where it would be restricted for the ground floor?
So that is one of those things that we talked about it with the consultant, and that's one of those things that we would need to. Most likely, we would, if we wanted to go daycare, we would still probably wanna clean it up to a residential. Now, the thing is, most likely, we're gonna wanna clean it up anyway. If we're gonna do any sort of development, we don't purposely leave dirty sites that we own. But if we were looking at daycare, we would probably need to put it to a level of residential because we wouldn't want children there all day, and heaven forbid there be some sort of issue that we knew about, that, you know, we didn't do everything.
So that brings up a good question, is the intent here to just be leasing the facility from the city, or looking to find a tenant and sell to them?
We would probably be turning it over to a
Yeah,
developer.
we would not control that site. We would do just like we're doing on across the street down at 295 Commercial Street Southeast.
Yeah.
We would go through a process to solicit from the development community their concepts and what they would want to do there. And then we would go through a disposition development agreement
Yeah.
and turn the property over to
But
them.
since we own the site, we have control over sort of what they're gonna do because we can give incentives. So we
Correct.
could say, we'll give it to you for $1, but you need to meet what we want you to be able to sort of do or something like that.
Well, the price is based on the difficulty of the site and.
Sure,
and
and you build that
an
into the sale
appraisal.
price that
but
you're
you
going to
guys
take care of the
And then we
cleanup.
have a development agreement with them, so there's certain expectations that they have to meet.
Yeah.
And there's expectations on us in terms of what we're providing or what we're doing with them, and then they would own the site and we wouldn't any longer.
I guess I'm just trying to understand, if that were the case and you could build it in, why would the city or why would the Gateway Group want the liability? If you found a buyer that said, I would, part of the deal, I'll clean it up, or I'll make it usable for my intention, and we said that's okay. Why-
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you have the other party, I was hearing
no,
like.
no, they
some
might. They-
responsibility.
No, they could very well do it. What we're doing is understanding what would need to be done. So we have to, because we can't go out and say like, oh yeah, we're gonna do housing there. But we don't know if you can do the ground floor. You have to go to DEQ. We have a agreement with DEQ that basically says you will only use it for this purpose, which is really the road. So any other design, we're required to discuss it with DEQ
Right.
to find out what would need to be done in order to do it. So if we're gonna move ahead on any sort of a development other than that, even if we're gonna hand it over through a development agreement, we have to work with DEQ on the front side. It doesn't mean that we don't find out what it is and then the developer handles it. It doesn't mean that we have to do the cleanup. But there might be cleanups required for different types of things.
Right.
That financially will then not make that project feasible, and so that would limit in scope what we're asking of a developer.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So
And if
it's
we know
more
the scope,
that
what the
piece.
cleanup cost is gonna be, then
Exactly, yeah.
everybody gonna go into it.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to understand now is what does it mean? And if they say you can only dig 6 feet in the ground. Okay, well, that's gonna limit how tall of a structure we can do and things like that. So that's what we wanna try and understand now that we actually have some concepts that we can sit down with them and it's not just, well, if we wanted to do industrial, what would that look like? We actually have more specifics and impacts to the site to get an idea as to like, this is what it would be. And two, are there things that it would make sense for the city to actually do in preparation for development?
So
Would we-
what I think I heard Mike say is, why don't you put the for sale sign up on it? Versus what we're talking about today. The difference is that it's an opportunity site, is how. Again, I'm not your staff liaison, but it's an opportunity site in an area of which you get to influence. And so your role will be to say, based on what you're getting for information, which is again different than what my board got. This is what our vision is. This is what we would like that particular site to contribute to this community. That's the difference between I put the for sale sign up. So because we own the site, you get to influence, not I want a grocery store or I want a yoga. That may be what you get at the end of the day, but you're creating more. This is what you want on behalf of. If it's childcare, then it's just not necessarily say childcare, but something that would contribute to the families and wealth creation in that community. You get to outline. And then when the proposals come in, that's what you would be looking at them against. So I would come up with an evaluation criteria, and you guys came up with 10 things that you really want somebody to think about. Now, if they give you a proposal that says, we would do a mix of uses that would include daycare on the second floor. You know, with an
Everybody
interior,
happy.
with an interior.
On the road, they could be on the road and we'll put a fencing all around it.
And
It's really track.
Daycare.
Yeah, and we're gonna put a coffee shop.
Oh yeah, we've thrown it up,
you
we've
know.
floated so many ideas, like you could have a
Yeah,
little
you don't
market
wanna know what
space,
we
you could
think
do
should go
senior,
there.
I mean, we've actually talked about moving things in the area
But
and.
that's what your role would be, that's the difference between just putting the sign up for sale, cause I kind of,
Which we can't,
and so for like across the street, and it will be different for you to discuss. Their goal was to do everything, they want me to do everything that I need to do to have for site readiness. And that's because when it finally does we select somebody, they're not stuck with now 2 years having to deal with the environmental issues across the street, taking down those buildings. So I've taken down the buildings, I've had to pay for somebody to replat that thing over there. So that was their goal too, to incur those costs, take it off the burden of a developer, make it as ready as possible. And again, that isn't necessarily what you would say, that was a different kind of site. But again, you may say, we don't want that building either, you know, we want to get it site ready. Sarah's talking about the environmental piece. Do what you need to do to help your vision or your goal be met at the end of the day. And I hope I didn't mistake you, but that's what I heard when I.
No, basically, yeah, that's what I was just trying to discern, if it's really unknown, if it ended up being more of an industrial that where it wasn't as critical, let it be due to previous ownership of the DEQ. If that's where you win, then from both sides, would both sides need to make it as, but if it's a particular site that, you know, involves residential use and so forth, it's gonna take a higher level of that, then that's, it's gonna be a fixed cost. It's an investment, and then say, what's the, oh, yeah, that'll come further, right?
Yes, that's what we're hoping to learn very, very soon.
Yeah.
I was actually hoping I would have already had the meeting by today, so I mean, we are close to getting something locked down, to sort of
That makes
have that, and then my goal is then, hopefully the October meeting, I can bring the board that information. And then we can kind of go from there, so it's sort of this step by step without bombarding everyone with a ton of stuff.
I just have one thing to add before.
Sure.
we move on. Just
Okay.
About the daycare thing, because I was looking at the additional funding sources and I know of a couple of things that aren't on here just because they're in my world of early learning care. So there's a affordable, it's also OHCS that does it. But it's the co-location of affordable rental housing and early learning or daycare. And so I just wanted to mention that. Structure fund that's coming out, so there's no to be aware of this. That becomes a bit-
No, that's great, yeah, no, definitely. And they sort of threw a few things in there, we didn't kind of go into that too much, but I think, you know, depending on which direction we go, having more information, and kind of providing any resources is always super, super helpful. So what this is, so the culmination of the market study tied with the developer outreach kind of came up with 4 different types of uses on this site that the consultants used as sort of their prototypes to figure out feasibility. So some of the things I wanted to share with you, because they did have these conversations with developers, with brokers, with different real estate experts. Some of the themes that led to sort of how they got to where they got was, you know, the rising interest rates, the shifts in the market demand, can really slow certain development types like office. They've also caused projects to take longer, financing is more difficult. Industrial continues to see strong demand throughout the area, although some new spec projects have led to a slight increase in vacancy rate. The smaller incubator industrial spaces are needed as feeders to sort of those larger distribution warehouses is what they're seeing. Office and retail have had higher vacancies recently, but it also depends obviously on the product and the location. The office market really is still stabilizing into what is a new normal. But they did identify that medical office remains steady due to the stable demand and the related sort of medical institutions within Salem. And multifamily demand remains high, though some markets are approaching saturation. This specific parcel, they said, might be challenging for a market rate, just given the lack of sort of nearby amenities and the railroad frontage. But affordable housing remains an acute need for the area. Some of the other considerations that led to this, so, you know, they identified the surrounding area sort of being really unique with the mix of industrial, fairground, and residential sort of uses where you still have sort of those large gaps due to like the surface parking lots of some of these facilities, makes it kind of more unique. The rail line obviously sort of impacts the desirability for some uses like market rate probably housing, although some of those can be mitigated. The proximity to I-5, downtown and medical are still really positive elements to the market and along with sort of transit access. This corridor does have a larger share of multi-family and middle housing units compared to the city as a whole, with a higher share of renter households. They also identified that renters were also more likely to be cost burdened than homeowners within the corridor. So some type of affordable housing would be a natural fit. Compared with the city, this corridor is home to only a small amount of office stock. But there isn't really a lot of interest in sort of office minus the medical. Retail space has a really low vacancy rate. Rents are on par with the city as a whole, which typically would say there's a strong demand, but retail doesn't overall have a strong demand. So it's kind of one of those, you wouldn't want to go all retail, but if you had some retail component within, it might still work. And then, the corridor, we already said, is tied to the 18% of the industrial. So they came up with these sort of four. What they really noticed is, for industrial, the reason they started looking at it, it's got the demand. It draws the higher rent per square foot in the city overall. So that makes it more successful. It's got lower vacancies over the past decade. It's not sufficient to accommodate the larger land intensive industrial use such as warehouses or heavy manufacturing. But it does have the good location. And the prototype that they tested was a smaller flex or incubator style that could have potential use on the site. Now the images that you're seeing, so we sort of have massing. So what the massing really is, it's not what it would look like, but when you take into consideration the restrictions of the site and everything that would be required, what they did is they sort of dropped it on there as to like what it could be built out, how much of the site it would actually take, just to give some sort of a visual. The comparable developments, once again, these weren't used for anything other than just to give a visual as to sort of what type of development that could kind of correlate to. So, if you say industrial, you're not thinking, of some manufacturing, you're actually looking at, something that's small industrial flex to give a visual versus just saying flex that not everybody, correlates things with. The medical office, so it's already located near existing medical office space. They identified that healthcare is a growing sector in Salem. It has the second highest employment of all industries in the city, and higher than above average wages. So it's kind of desirable from an dev perspective. And their retail linkage data indicated that health and personal care stores broadly have a market gap in the surrounding area of the site. So there could be a demand.
So are they saying there's not a lot in that area?
So they're saying there is some in the area, but that this would piggyback on that really well if there's a demand for it. And then you've got mixed use. So the challenges with the sort of the ground floor residential led them to want to put together some sort of a mixed use where you would have commercial on the ground floor and then multifamily market rate up above. And then obviously affordable housing, which we've kind of already touched on a few times, is sort of their fourth option. Some of these we'll be able to skip through. So this just gives you sort of the key assumptions that they used. And this is tied to what the site looks like, what you could actually do. So like industrial, you're looking at a 25,000 square foot sort of facility. You're taking about 34% of the site, 25 jobs, 1 story, 25 parking spaces. Obviously, parking isn't required like it used to be, but our development team was very adamant. And when they talk to developers, you still need parking, especially in this location where you don't have a lot of adjacent parking access. So they did build that into a number that would be desirable to a developer. Medical office, about 23,000 square feet, mixed use, you're looking at about, a 4-story building. Got 65,000 square feet in general, 87 housing units. And then for the affordable housing, it's actually a little bit smaller. And that's actually due to the needed parking. Affordable housing, typically you actually need more parking. And so they build that in. So that's where you're seeing sort of that difference in the building size. And the number of units, and the percentage of the mix of units.
Oh, that's why it's the last. Cause I was thinking like, why would affordable
Oh,
housing-
it's not actually last at this point, it's just 4 different concepts.
Oh, for
They didn't rank it, they didn't do anything like
okay.
that, it's just, these are just the 4 different concepts.
Okay,
And at this point, these are just what they put into their their prototype to build it out to figure out what would be feasible.
Okay.
And then this is sort of how that concept that we talked about sort of works. So they kind of do a few different things. So they kind of have these range of inputs, so all this data that they have, and they do this pro forma modeling to figure out, how much is it gonna cost? What are those, costs gonna be? What are the revenues gonna be? They kind of defined all the costs and the revenues from the development community to make sure that they were accurate and, applicable for this area. And then, other local trends. So they get all those costs, all those revenues, they know where they're at, and then what they do is they sort of do this thing called a residual land value analysis. And that's sort of the gap between what your costs are gonna be and how much you still have left where you're still making money on your development that you can spend on it. So we're not having them build in a cost of land, it's just what's the development, and then do you have money left to actually purchase your land? And what does land actually go for? And so that's sort of what they do to figure out, is it a feasible development or not? Or what kind of subsidy might it need in order for that type of a development to move forward? Is kind of the way that I sort of like to look at it, that I feel like is a little less complicated than their very long way. So, you see here, same thing, here's your development costs, you got all your hard costs, your soft costs, your value, what are you gonna get from all your income, you can get up to here. So this is how much you have available for your land budget to actually purchase your site and get ready to go. And that's kind of, what they're using to figure out how feasible the project is. So some of the projects are less likely to meet the minimum expectations for sort of investment. So for instance, affordable housing, because it's offering below market rate rents, it rarely will actually provide sufficient return on investment so that you have a positive project. However, it's also a need, and typically those projects you have subsidies. So you can make up that gap sort of through those different, subsidies, through different fundings. Obviously, different types of projects, like, what Dana was bringing up, you could do the same thing. If you have other funds coming in, you can sort of solve that gap depending on the development team and the developer that you're working with. So that's kind of how they kind of get around to getting to this sort of piece that we're working on. So then what they did is they run all of that, and then it tells you how much they have available for the land per square foot to tell you whether or not it's feasible. They've valued our land, if we were to go at market rate, at $24 a square foot. So as you'll see, technically, if we went at market, then nothing actually works. I mean, basically,
None of it meets.
it costs a lot to
it's
build.
11, I get it.
24, yeah, no, none of them have the 24. If we went market rate, but
Right.
we don't have to because we have the land, it makes it a little bit different, but these, industrial medical still come out ahead where they're not in the negative for development of a project. Where you see mixed rate or mixed use is very much in the hole for development. Affordable housing is in the hole, but definitely not as much as mixed use.
I wonder, did they say why mixed use is so in the negative?
They did, and
Seems to me like you have way more square footage of building, you would be
It's-
making up.
yeah, so part of it is the fact that operating expenses are at about 20%, so that kind of is an issue. They also can't build out as many units because of the site and because of some of the constraints, the values and what's around there, they can't charge what they really need to for what the cost of the development is actually gonna be. And when you're going market rate, you just don't have the same subsidy options that you would have with other projects, so that's part of the issue. And we can go down, so here it's just a visual what we just saw, here's your land. And that's where it's a little. So this is where it kind of, kind of see the positives and the negatives, industrial, you have the lowest costs, lowest rent. There are site limitations, but that's why it's there. Medical, it's more expensive to build because of the medical, but you can charge a higher rent. And then, this is where we kind of get into that. This has a bunch of stuff all over it because affordable housing really doesn't fit in this because there's so many different pieces that can affect it. That we'll kind of discuss, but for industrial, here, that's the biggest thing is it's the low construction costs will make it pretty feasible. It's got the site access, we have a low market area vacancy, which makes it a little bit more desirable. The medical, once again, you got the higher construction costs but you get higher rents. Most medical offices in Salem actually occupy smaller lots than what this one is. So they may not need the whole thing for medical office, so there could be additional uses as part of that development option. So mixed use, that's where you've got high construction costs, really high interest rates. And really you need to have lower multifamily rents within that market area in order to make it feasible. It just doesn't balance out with the current condition. And then the affordable housing, it shows a gap of about 2.4 million versus the 11 million, so it's a little bit more tolerable. And that's, once again, it's the high construction cost as part of it. It does also have high operating expenses. But there's more options to, there is different types of funding, there's, light tech funding. We are outside of the qualified census tract, and we have the railroad, which makes it a little less desirable.
Is there anything you'd like me to share with you as far as what?
Thanks for joining us. Their insight of the neighboring area was helpful, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so
I mean,
much.
if you ever need me to come back and kind of walk you through what we've done on the other ones, and kind of what I see your role being.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheree.
Appreciate it.
Yes. Nice to meet you too.
So, that's sort of what we've learned.
Is everybody good on time? I know we're running over.
Yeah, I need to get rolling here in a bit, so
Okay.
maybe we could wrap up.
Yeah.
Summary if there's.
Yeah, I know.
Luckily, there's
questions.
no action needed from you guys today. So really what the goal today is just to share what we learned. And to walk through it a little bit because it's a lot. Now, there's other stuff in here. They put it in, it doesn't mean it's something that we're really, I didn't edit their slides or anything like that. Some of the stuff isn't really accurate. Some of it we are moving forward on, some of it, it's just the way that they wanted to do things. It's what happens when you have consultants, kind of throwing out some different ideas. But the idea really is, these, their findings are really focused on industrial, medical office, or affordable housing. That mixed use really does everything there, and that's what they narrowed it down to. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just taking what they gave us, and I'm saying if we did industrial, medical, affordable housing, it took up this much of the site, it was this many stories, what does that mean to do? So it's kind of the next thing. How does environmental impact all of these different functions? To bring that back to this group. At the same time, I'll have internal conversations with Sheree and with Kristen, the director, to say this is kind of what we're seeing. What's the pulse kind of the city, what's the pulse tied to this site? And then, in October, either we'll be having a discussion of, what are the next steps? Are we gonna start talking about, what we would like to see the goals for the site? So, as Sheree said, there's sort of a process that, DAB went through a little bit of a longer process because they didn't have this tool accessible to them, which is really nice for us. But is it the next step being what's the vision that this board sees for the site? And then what would typically happen is then we would take a sort of staff report to the agency, but it would be through an executive session because this is a real estate sort of development to make sure that the direction that the board sees the site is the same direction that they're comfortable with. And then that's where we sort of develop this RFP. Which allows developers to kind of say, hey, we're interested, this is what we have, we build a matrix to evaluate them and then, select, go through sort of this process, agency would be involved in that process, which eventually leads to hopefully a disposition of development agreement with somebody to do something in a very quick, high level, lots of steps kind of way. It will take time to get to all of those things, but I think the biggest thing is one, let's find out the environmental, because if the environmental comes back and we have to do the same thing for all of them, then the question becomes, do we wait? Or do we decide to do industrial site readiness like we've done other sites and get in there, put the money in and get the site up and start while we're working on what we want out of the developer, also get the site ready so that we can turn it over and see development quicker. So I think that's sort of gonna be the next piece that we're discussing. And then it'll be sort of that vision of the site.
So we're talking about all the prepared and kind of how we want to go to market with this. Has there been anybody that's approached the city that's very interested in the site from any of
There's
that
been,
area, any of those fields at this point? Is there?
there's been developers who have,
Specific name,
no,
like
no.
a category that's been like saying, we have really strong interest.
We've had people outreach about, you know, what are you wanting to do with the site? Personally, I really try not to have those conversations with folks. I try to stay out of it as much as possible because I don't want it to get into an interesting situation. So, you know, at this point, we're evaluating what those redevelopment options will be. You know, I think it's a site that's kind of been under the radar, so we haven't had a lot of folks sort of reach out. I'm sorry, Linda.
That's okay.
Well, and it's also had the,
We've had a use on there.
That's something that's.
Yeah.
It's been
It's stayed active.
dedicated with something, so something
Correct.
that's been occupied.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
If it was empty, then you might get.
now that it's empty, cause it is empty.
No, we
right?
still have our lease agreement, so it's still being used for administrative uses.
No, but they don't have the tiny homes there anymore.
No one can
Yeah.
stay there, but they are using it for administrative uses, so they're
Gotcha.
doing offices, they're doing cleaning, so it still provides a service.
Okay.
So we still have a lease agreement, I'm about to cough, and no one wants to hear that. We still have a lease agreement in place, so that's the nice thing, it isn't like what you said, Mike, it's not a vacant site, so I think it's kind of an off the radar for that. And it's also just a really unique site now. Now that Eco has done a bunch of outreach, you know, there could be people that are starting, but I haven't heard a ton. I think two people just what's feasible, you know, and I have heard that before we even got into this, we don't even know what's really feasible, you know, it's an odd site, the access is kind of interesting. What's happening around there now, I do think obviously doing all the improvements on Silverton, knowing we're gonna make some improvements on Portland Road, I think that will add to viability for that particular site. You know, having those improvements, and then hopefully that will lead to more development in the area that can then support whatever, you know, we decide makes sense, whatever the development community makes sense. But you know, my big thing is if someone came to me, I would just say, you know, at this point, we haven't identified any sort of a use. The board has started to receive some information, and if they wanna go online and see what you've been provided, they're welcome to sort of do that.
So that's why it is good to keep moving along in this process, because if things are improving, if there is more visibility, then someone may come along, and if we're ready to go, then we can quickly move and say, oh, I mean, there's somebody that has strong interest, a good tenant.
Yeah.
Or a good owner of that would add value. And here in the beginning, or something, it's like, we're ready to go, but it's not ready to go. It's like, okay, yeah, we directed the opportunity, so I like the idea of keeping
We're gonna keep moving.
forward movement on it, yes, so that it's.
Yeah, this was a longer process just to go through this, but I think the benefit is we're starting at a point where we understand like what's feasible, what are we looking at, what the options actually are versus sort of like, no, there's, you know, you look at the zoning and what you can do and you're like, there's hundreds of uses, what makes sense, you know, and I think this helps kind of get that idea. Cause we know development is really hard right now, we know that costs are really high, we know that interest rates are high, I mean, so many developers I've talked to, you know, they have so many projects on hold right now, because the numbers, even if we subsidize on other projects that I've talked to folks about, it still isn't enough. And so we are in kind of an interesting point. I'm hopeful
Yeah, hope
that we
rates go
start
down.
to see that creep down while we're sort of doing this, so that the timing aligns where we're back in that comfortable development zone and we're ready to package this up and we can get, you know, some really good interest on it. I do feel like the timing is better than if we would have been ready a year ago. I don't think we would have had a lot of fights. It's just not big enough of a site that you can develop enough to bring in that revenue. I mean, that's with the site across the street, I mean, it's a lot, you know, you can do so much there because of its size. We don't have that option on this site, so it's a little more of a threading the needle, just
Yeah.
perfect, to what's the needs, we wanna benefit the community. And at the same time, we need it to be profitable
Right.
to somebody at the end of the day. So I think this did take a little bit longer because we sort of had this build out. But having them do that developer analysis, which like I said, we've never asked them to do on a site before, I think we will actually start doing more of. We've started talking internally that knowing that is really huge. And it's just really good information that we can access moving forward. So that's where we are. It's a lot. I'm sure after the fact, you're gonna have like much more questions, which is why I didn't want any action items. I'm like, I give you guys everything. And then, you know, as we have questions, we'll, you know, you can always reach out. We'll have it on the agenda. Hopefully we'll have an October meeting if I have answers. If I don't have answers, then we would have it in November, but I'm shooting for October. So that's what's happening with 2640. I almost
Yeah.
did it. I almost did it. So that's what's happening with 2640.
Yeah, I'm glad that we decided to move forward with these guys doing the analysis. I think that was super helpful.
Very impressive, Sarah. Very impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the consultants. They're fantastic. They're lovely to work with, so.
Well, I know we're over time. I appreciate everybody staying late. Anything else? Anybody got anything to add? Welcome. We're happy you're here.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah.
In the future, you can't, hybrid is definitely still an option, so you just need to let Linda know and she'll send you.
Just remember, you'll be on that TV.
You will be on the TV, so you're very large when we see you and you're by yourself, there is that.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and adjourn.
Okay.
Perfect.
See you in October.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.